Welcome to BIA Media, Canada's top black media provider. Whether you're looking for content on fashion, art, music, or simple lifestyle, we bring you the best the black community in Ottawa has to offer and so much more. And better yet, do you have a project you need help with? Well, look no further. We provide equipment, studio, and office space, as well as a team of dedicated individuals to help you bring those ideas to life. So don't wait. Check out our new website at biamedia.ca for more information on how to contact us and start creating today. BIA Media, your way.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to session 5 of our course, Haitian Independence as an All-African Revolutionist. I shouldn't say course, really it's a seminar, even though we stretched it longer than most of our seminars. So this week we're going to pick up right where we left off at the end of the 1950s, and we will go up to around 2004, 2010. And the topic for today is the resistance of the Haitian people to neocolonialism. The resistance to neocolonialism, which will go from around 1960 to 2010, really a little bit earlier, 1957 to 2010. And we'll stop there, and then next week we will conclude our course by going from 2010, 2011 up to the present. So we will define neocolonialism today. We're going to talk about how the people, both in the rural areas and in the urban areas, resisted this, resisted the external aggression as well as the internal despotism of the leadership during this time, which was marked by, of course, the years of the Duvaliers, Papa Doc and Baby Doc, who we'll spend a lot of time talking about today. So let's recap. Last week we talked about resistance to occupation, how the Haitian people put up successful resistance to the aggression of the United States during the actual period of occupation from 1915 to 1934-35, and afterwards as the U.S. continued to meddle in Haitian affairs, and as the Haitian elite continued to bicker among themselves about who was going to have the privilege of exploiting the masses. And we saw what emerged in the 1940s. You had the old school mulatto elite that had been running things pretty much since independence, with breaks here and there. Of course, we had the Dessalines regime at the beginning, and a few other dark-skinned African Haitian leaders at certain points, but for the most part dominated the economics and the political scene in Haiti. And then you had this emerging dark-skinned middle class united under the idea of Noirism. Noirism, the belief that the political destiny and the economic destiny of Haiti should be controlled by the darker-skinned people of Haiti. They weren't arguing for a radical redistribution of wealth or a revolutionary change in societal relations. They just said the people that should be exploiting the working masses should be dark-skinned instead of light-skinned. That's what the Noirs were arguing. And by the time we get to the 1950s, a Noirist president who actually did do a lot for Haiti, Dumarsais Estime, was removed from office by a military coup, and then military rule ruled Haiti until the elections of 1957. 1957. And when 1957 elections occur, the U.S. is still behind the scenes trying to pull strings to get the best candidate in. But their interests coincidentally allied with, for a time, the interest of what seemed to be the interest of the masses. This mild-mannered former doctor, Noirist, intellectual named Duvalier. This is Papa Doc, Francois Duvalier. Francois Duvalier had come up in Noirist circles. He was a student of Estime. He served in Estime's government, and he was perceived to be by the masses as someone that wasn't going to use his position to exploit them. He didn't amass riches during his time as a cabinet member. And he had, made a name for himself working in the rural areas as a doctor. So I get the name Papa Doc. He was a medical doctor. He actually had done some training in the University of Michigan. So the U.S. looked at him, the masses looked at him, and they said, okay, we think this is a candidate that can run the country. So with a pretty large majority, Francois Duvalier gets elected president of Haiti in 1957. 6 months into his reign, and let's just again situate ourselves geographically because this becomes very important. In the late 1950s, going into the 1960s, Haiti becomes even more strategically important to the United States. This is the period of the Cold War. In 1959, the island to the west, Cuba, the people pulled off one of the most successful revolutions in the 20th century, the Cuban Revolution, that brings Fidel Castro and Che Guevara and Raul Castro and the others into power. Anti-imperialist, anti-capitalist, a socialist government 90 miles away from the United States. The U.S. did not want this to domino in this region that it considered its backyard. So as the United States was making its diplomatic and using its intelligence agencies to try to undermine the Cuban Revolution, they needed allies in the region to help undermine Cuba and to make sure the Cuban example of anti-imperialism, anti-capitalism didn't spread to other areas. So when Duvalier comes on the scene, they see Duvalier as an active partner in this. Because one of the things that Duvalier was for, he was a noirist. So he was for dark-skinned Haitians running the economy, running the politics of Haiti. But he was anti-communist. He wasn't for unions. He wasn't for the working class. He wasn't for intellectuals that had a leftist orientation. Those intellectuals, those students that had 10 years earlier in 1946 helped to overthrow a U.S. puppet. Those students that took to the streets like we talked about, and those women's movements that took to the streets in 1946 to usher in a revolution of sorts, Duvalier wasn't for that. He wasn't for a class analysis of the Haitian situation. His analysis was dark-skinned people should rule, not light-skinned people and not the working class. So the U.S. saw in Duvalier an active partner in this anti-communist, anti-socialist world order that they were trying to build in the Cold War era. But Duvalier showed his true colors not long after his election, because his election, even though he won, he still had political opponents. He still had a mulatto elite to deal with. He still had the union workers and the leftists and the radicals that were led by people like Fignole, who was a former president. He was president for like 19 days, and he was a trade union activist, and he was one of the opponents of the emerging Duvalier regime and the Noirist ideology. So there were political opponents. And the military, which, again, let's go back to the occupation years and the post-occupation years. At this point, the Haitian military is still under the tutelage of the U.S., of U.S. Marines. There's a training institute that's created in Haiti to train Haitian officers. Many Haitian officers are also getting trained and would be trained at Fort Benning, Georgia, in the quote-unquote School of the Americas, where the U.S. trained dictators and military officials from the Caribbean and from South America, not to serve the interests of the masses in those countries, but to serve U.S. interests. So the military is still, under the control of U.S. officials. So Duvalier sees this. So he recognizes there's all of these opponents to his new political regime. So he goes on the offensive really early into his regime, into his presidency. And he starts to do a number of things. The information that we're talking about today, the first part of this book, we're going to be coming out of Haitian History, New Perspectives. A few articles in here deal with the Duvalier years. This is a collection of essays and articles dealing with Haitian history. The second part of the class, The Prophet and Power, which deals with the post-Duvalier years, particularly the rise of Aristide. We'll talk about him in the second part of the class. So I just want to alert you to two books. If you want more detailed background information of what we're talking about, I recommend these two books for the time period that we're talking about today. 1957, he's elected. So between 57 and 64, in those years, between 1957 and 1964, Francois Duvalier unleashes a terror on Haiti that had never been seen before. First, he started with his political opponents. Before in Haiti, when there were battles among the elites for power, for who's going to control things politically. There were assassinations. Generally, it's the person that was the political opponent that was assassinated or forced into exile. Francois Duvalier took it to another level. His forces not only killed the opponent, they killed the opponent's family, the opponent's wife, children, even the pets in houses. This was designed to instill terror. His regime was built on terror, terrorizing the population, terrorizing political opponents so that he could have total control over the state. And he was very intelligent. I mean, the brutality that he used to maintain his position was a sick type of ingenious, because he knew what he had to do to maintain power, not to help the masses of Haitian people. That wasn't not his goal. His goal was to maintain power for himself and to amass riches for his family and the small clique of people that pledged allegiance to him. They amassed riches. They amassed wealth. If you pledged allegiance to Duvalier, then you were allowed to play the political game, play the economic game. But if you showed any type of resistance, or he felt that you were going to betray him in any type of way, you were removed, either forced into exile, killed, tortured, etc. There was a torture chamber in the presidential palace. This is what this man did. And he used all the instruments of the state that he could to maintain his power. So again, he didn't trust the military because the military was controlled by the U.S. And even though the U.S. saw in him an ally in the anti-communist struggle, he never trusted the U.S. completely, and the U.S. never trusted him completely. And he didn't want to answer to the U.S. for anything that he was doing. He refused to be a puppet in that way. Duvalier wanted control. He wanted power. He wanted wealth, but he didn't want to be a puppet of the U.S. So although not common for the U.S. forced him to be in times where him and the U.S. were incredibly at odds, by the time we get to around 1963, after he's committed most of his atrocities, he threatened to go back and be less hostile to communism, at least diplomatically, not internally in Haiti, but at least diplomatically, unless the U.S. continued to uphold his regime through aid and through the support of, his atrocities. So he kept the Marine officers training there, but he would shuffle the officers in the Haitian military to make sure that no one got comfortable. He would remove people from office. He would promote officers, not based on their merit, but based off of their perceived level of allegiance to him and his regime. Duvalier also made sure that there was another force in the country, side by side with the military, but this force would be personally answerable to him. Actually, there were two. He created a number of these armed wings of the government, of the state, that would do his bidding. One, probably the more famous one, is the Tonton Macoutes. The Tonton Macoutes. This was a death squad, personally allied to Francois Duvalier. The actual name is something like the Volunteers for State Protection or something that sounds nice, but everybody called it the Tonton Macoute. This was the brutal wing of his security forces. The Tonton, these were citizens that were armed by the state. So it's separate from the military. They were armed civilians that were tasked with looking for any signs of opposition to Duvalier. If you were in the market and you said something against Duvalier and his spy network got it back, you might be eliminated. You might be tortured. You might be disappeared. So many things could happen to you. So many things could happen to your family, your children, your wife, all of these things. Then there was another group called the Leopards. This group was, again, trained by the U.S. It's another paramilitary group trained by the U.S. for counterinsurgency tactics. Again, the U.S. was big on this during the Cold War years, and still to this day. They weren't training foreign militaries, whether it be in South America, the Caribbean, Africa, the Middle East, anywhere. They weren't training these militaries for external wars, for if these countries were invaded by someone that these militaries could fight them off. These militaries were trained primarily in counterinsurgency. What does that mean? That's just a big word for killing civilians. That's what counterinsurgency means. If the civilians ever rise up and say enough is enough of these governments, we want to make sure your military is skillful enough to take them down. That's all it means. That's all counterinsurgency means. So that's what these militaries were trained for. So the Leopards was one group, the Tonton Macoutes and the military and the police force, all expertly controlled by Duvalier. If you showed 1 ounce of opposition to Duvalier, one of these groups might come after you. And if you were in these groups and you showed betrayal, someone is always willing to take your place. If you're a general, if you're an officer in one of these groups and you say something, someone said, well, I'll take this place. Why? Because what Duvalier began to do between 1957 and 1964, he issued a number of new laws to further tax the people of Haiti. So if you were engaged in some middle class or working class economic activity, the state started taxing you to take even the little bit of a surplus that you had was going back to the state. And the state wasn't using that money to build hospitals and roads and education centers. It was lining the pockets of Duvalier, and then Duvalier would give that money out to his supporters, officers, to staff and weaponize the Tonton Macoute, to staff and weaponize the Leopards and all these groups. So you can imagine you're a poor person, working class person. Maybe you came from the countryside, you came to Port-au-Prince, to find work, and the only work that was available was in one of these security forces. And then you enter the security force, and your officer says, okay, we're going to go in this house and we're going to kill this entire family because the father and mother is in political opposition to Duvalier. Now you, as a new recruit, might feel some type of way, but I don't want to kill innocent people. But if I don't do this, I might appear as though I'm disloyal. And what will happen to me? What might happen to my family? So you go into it. And then we already know from psychological studies the effects of what happens when people put on those uniforms, whether it's the military or the police force, what that does to people. And they become almost like a gang in and of themselves. So you go through with these atrocities. And by the time you do more and more of them, it becomes normalized to you. And not only are you committing the atrocities as a job, you're also stealing from those people. You're also getting bonuses, from the regime. And eventually you lose your humanity by being engaged in these activities. So we had a whole generations of folks between 57 and the 80s that were in these groups that were regular people. Side by, you wouldn't know the difference who they were. They were just people trying to make the living, but through the ruthlessness of the regime, it twists the psychology of individuals. That allows them to commit these types of crimes. So Duvalier played on all of this. He was able to crush so many opponents. The Catholic Church became an opponent of Duvalier, particularly in the late 1950s and 1960s. I mean, in the early 1960s. Duvalier saw in the Catholic Church, now part of his critique of the church was actually well-founded. Since independence, the Catholic Church had been operating in Haiti largely controlled by foreigners. The leading bishops and the leading priests all came from abroad. And their task, it seemed, was to ensure that the Haitian people never developed a spiritual and political ideology that separated them from what was going on in France. That's what the role of the Catholic Church did. These foreigners came in and they said, listen, all that African culture and all that stuff you're doing, we got to get rid of that. You need to have this type of understanding of philosophy, this type of understanding of theology, and that's what it's going to be. It was a conservative church. It was a church dedicated to the elite. And again, how we talked about those elite would go back and forth from getting educated in France to running things in Haiti. So they had a French outlook on things. The Catholic Church controlled a lot of the top educational institutions in Haiti. So for generations, it had been an armed, I wouldn't say armed, it was arm in arm with the elite, particularly the mulatto elite. So when Francois Duvalier comes into power, he says, I'm going to crush this church. All of these foreign bishops and priests, you have to leave. I'm going to Haitianize the church. I'm going to Haitianize the church. So through threats of violence and other things, he forced those foreigners to leave, and more black bishops and priests were put into the church. But that wasn't enough for him. Because many of these priests, many of these bishops were also learning and developing this new idea of liberation theology. So even though they were priests in the Catholic Church, it actually backfired on Duvalier because the foreigners, they were allied to the section of the church that was conservative. But these new Haitian bishops and priests that Duvalier kind of pushed into place, they had a liberation theology understanding of the Bible and of the Catholic Church. Their belief was, when we look at the Bible doesn't teach you to uphold unjust institutions. Jesus was a poor son of a carpenter, pastor who was executed by the state, by the Romans, because he had a message that was inherently for justice. It was inherently against oppressive institutions, whether it be the Romans, whether it be the monarchy at the time in Judea, whether it was the parasitic Pharisees and Pharisees in the religious order of the day. Jesus was against these systems. So priests and people in the Catholic Church that say that they're followers of Christ need to have this type of position here on earth. It's not just about doing good and dying and going to heaven. It's about changing the material conditions here on earth. So a number of new priests were preaching this. So when Duvalier realized this, then he started to attack the church even more. Assassinations, killings, tortures of priests, these types of things were happening. Intellectuals and educational institutions. Duvalier knew, being an intellectual, that ideas are just as important as guns. When the masses can get ideas, when workers, when women's movements can get ideas that they can latch onto about changing society, that's dangerous. So he created parallel educational institutions that didn't teach these types of ideas, and those that did, they were shut down. They were shut down. Any educational institution, any intellectual that taught things that was contrary to what Duvalier wanted to uphold his state were either exiled, tortured, or killed. And in fact, many intellectuals, many folks with technological expertise, with medical expertise, if they had the money, they left. They went to Miami. They went to New York. They went to Montreal. They left. Why? Why would I live in a state that's run by terror? If I have to constantly think about if my children are going to make it home from school, or if my dinner conversation about the tax situation reached someone's ears and now I'm a target and I could be disappeared, or my wife could be raped, or my children could be kidnapped or tortured, I'm leaving. What's the first ticket to Miami? I'm out. The first ticket to New York, Montreal, I'm out. So Haiti lost a generation of expertise with technical know-how because they didn't want to stay in the Duvalier regime. We talked about the military, of course, the mulatto E, trade unions. In his anti-communist and anti-working class rhetoric and his regime, trade unions weren't safe. So the rights of workers in the urban areas, of course, went down the drain because there was no one there to protect them because Duvalier didn't want unions. And lastly, the press. 1946, when we go back to the major revolution before the Duvalier years, it was the press. It was this outbreak of student newspapers and independent journalists that were writing against the regime, that were getting the people ready to fight and resist. Duvalier, as an intellectual, he knew this, so he destroyed newspapers and press houses, except for the ones that were officially designated by him as being a supporter of his regime. When you can control the press, you can control the educational institutions, you control the minds of the people, what the people will intake and what they can't intake. And it helps legitimize your regime. And it only takes a generation or two. When you control these two functions of society, that people start to develop an amnesia of struggle. And they start to see the society, this is what it is. This is how it should be. This is the only way. This is what's happening in North Korea right now. This is what happened, we talked about last week in the Dominican Republic under Trujillo, where the whole narrative of the country was flipped around and changed to be this anti-Haitian narrative. Duvalier did the same thing. He created a situation that everything was done. Even, it's not listed here, but even among the practitioners of Haitian voodoo, Duvalier took advantage of. Duvalier said, I'm going to be the first president to actually uphold voodoo as a legitimate spiritual expression of the Haitian people. That sounds good in practice. But what he did was and voodoo has always been a decentralized spiritual faith. Unlike the Catholic Church that has a hierarchy, there's the Pope, there's Archbishop, there's bishops, priests, all that, all the way down. It's not like that in voodoo. But what Duvalier did, he took certain Hougans and Mambos and he propped them up because they pledged allegiance to him. And those practitioners of voodoo that didn't, just like anyone else, felt his wrath and the wrath of the Tonton Macoute and the leopards and all these other folks. So he took every institution in Haiti and used it to prop himself up. And he used violence and terror and torture and political exile, all the tools in his toolbox to do so. This is one of the most brutal times in Haitian history. Again, and he was able to do this because he had the support and at the very least the neglect of the United States. The United States let all of this happen because he was anti-communist. So they supported Papa Doc. They trained his troops, gave him economic aid. The only time aid was cut off was around 1963, where John F. Kennedy was getting these reports about what was going on in Haiti and was like, enough is enough. Duvalier, you have to stop this. He refused, and the U.S. cut off aid for a while, but about 3 years later, that aid came right back in. So it wasn't even really there was no, when U.S. foreign interests needed Haiti to have strategic votes on things, often against Cuba or against other revolutionary movements, whether that was in the Organization of American States or in the UN, Haiti became diplomatically important. So that's when the aid started coming in. And again, when this U.S. aid comes in, millions of dollars in aid that are supposed to be for infrastructure projects, that are supposed to be for education, healthcare, it's going right in the pockets of Duvalier and his supporters. So Haiti is getting poorer and poorer and poorer. Again, this is not because the country itself is poor. This is not because the Haitian people are lazy or the Haitian people don't know how to run an economy. This is because the economy was robbed by the Duvaliers, by American businessmen that still operated in Haiti, by American extractive industries that robbed Haiti of all of its copper. Haiti used to be a producer of copper. They extracted all the copper out of Haiti, pretty much all of it. Haiti used to be a bauxite producer. Extracted all the bauxite is the raw material that goes into aluminum. Extracted all of that from Haiti. All during the Duvalier years. So when we look at the current situation in Haiti and they say, well, Haiti is the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere and Haiti has the lowest literacy rates and the lowest life expectancy. This is the time period where a lot of that started. Of course you're going to have low life expectancy if the government isn't investing in healthcare. Of course you're going to have low literacy rates if the government isn't funding a public school system. Because all of the money that's supposed to be for these things are going into people's pockets. When we talk about Haiti being the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere, that's not saying everybody in Haiti is poor. There's some incredibly wealthy people at this time led by the Duvaliers that stole billions of dollars from Haiti. Billions. From the overtaxation of Haiti, at the same time being some of the poorest people in the world, they were the most taxed people in the world. Whether you lived in the rural areas, whether you were an urban worker, you were taxed by the state and you weren't seeing anything come back in terms of state investment in infrastructure and other things for that taxation. All that was going was into the pockets of the Duvalier and this new elite, this elite of dark-skinned elite. Instead of the light-skinned elite, now it's dark-skinned elite. And even the light-skinned elite still have some of their power. The ones that weren't outwardly opposed to Duvalier, they kept some of their power, their business and all that. And you still have the Syrians and other folks that are there, Lebanese that are still operating. Everybody's not poor. But you have this tiny, tiny elite based primarily in the major cities that's exploiting the masses. And the masses are still resisting, even though they're in the face of all this torture and killing and disappearing and all this, people still continue to resist. They still continue to resist. Finally, in 1971, I guess God had enough, and even though Francois Duvalier had a serious heart attack, and possibly even a stroke in the early 60s, he dies in 1971. And through his rework, back in 64, he had himself, quote unquote, elected president for life. He also rewrote the Constitution so that his son, his 19-year-old son, Jean-Francois Duvalier, becomes president for life in 1971. 19-year-old becomes president for life, succeeding his father in 1971. Of course, the U.S. looks at this so-called country that loves democracy, that wants to spread democracy around the world, that is fighting against the communists because of a love for a free world and free people. They say, cool, this is going to keep political stability in Haiti. Let's have a succession. President for life, new president, 19-year-old, why not? Then Baby Doc becomes president. Now, after 1971, and there's a little bit of a struggle, actually, that does occur among the elites when Baby Doc becomes president for life. It's actually, one side is his mother, actually, Duvalier's widow. She represents that old school, and her supporters of that old school dark-skinned elite that have now come into privilege. Whereas Baby Doc is growing around himself a more technocratic group of elites that still want to exploit the masses. No, both groups are for exploiting the masses, but he wants to bring more of the mulatto class in, the old school mulatto class, to be a part of this new technocratic elite that are going to use more nuanced ways, less overt terror and torture and destruction of exploiting the rural and urban masses of Haiti. And the people are still resisting. And we're going to talk about how they do this. This is around the time that Haiti enters the true stage of neocolonialism. It had started particularly during the occupation, but this is when it really becomes contemporary neocolonialism as defined by Kwame Nkrumah, who's writing about neocolonialism around the same time that all this is happening. He writes a book called Neocolonialism, The Last Stage of Imperialism in 1965. And he's writing in Ghana, and he's going to be overthrown by the U.S. a year later in 1966. But he says this: as these African countries and Caribbean countries and South American and Asian countries come out of colonialism, that's not the end of the story. That's not complete freedom. Because what the West is setting up next is a new form of colonialism that allows you to put up your own flag. So there won't be a British flag flying over your country. There won't be a French flag flying over your country. You'll have all the outward trappings of independence. But in reality, your economy and your military will be controlled from the outside. He says the essence of neocolonialism is that the state which is subject to it is in theory independent and has all the outward trappings of international sovereignty. In reality, its economic system and thus its political policy is directed from the outside. And this is a very large book. If you're interested in reading it, I think the PDF is in one of our other courses. But neocolonialism, it really breaks down what the second half of the 20th century looked like for most of the world. Here are the components. There's three, but there's actually four components of neocolonialism. Economic exploitation, puppet governments and client states, military assistance, and economic aid. These are the components of neocolonialism. And during the time of Baby Doc, from 71 to 1986, all of these were present in Haiti. And their neocolonial relationship was to the United States, to a lesser degree France, and to a lesser degree Canada. And we'll talk about Canada's role in all of this as well. Economic exploitation. One of the first things that we can see between 1967 and 1970, this is right before Baby Doc, nearly 100 foreign companies, primarily from the United States, signed contracts to install plants in Haiti. What were these plants doing? They were industrial plants. They were apparel manufacturing plants, which we'll talk about in a second. All designed, because what's happening, and it's really slick how neocolonialism works. 1967, let's think about the time period. What's going on in the United States? It's the period of the Black Power. This is the period of the anti-Vietnam War. This is a period of the 1960s where you have both blacks and whites in a more radical move that are talking about social change, that want capitalism in the United States to be transformed. This is what Dr. King was talking about in that same year, 1967. So instead of honoring the rights of workers in the United States, American capitalists said, let's find new outlets, or let's find new areas where we can exploit labor at the same level, if not lower, than what we did in the United States. The American workers aren't going for it anymore. They want health care. They want their hours to be a certain thing. They want maternity care, women coming into the workforce. They want a livable wage. We can't exploit them the way we could in the 50s and the 30s and all this. So let's look to Mexico. Let's look to the Caribbean. Let's look to Asian countries. And let's look to Haiti, where we can establish this, that we can move our production to these countries and we could pay these people pennies, and they'll work harder, they'll complain less, and even if they do complain, we have the Duvaliers and these other puppet leaders that will crush any workers' movement. So that the workers in America, will put them in other situations, will lower the cost for the American consumer, and will keep the revolution from spilling out in America by exporting these things. So even though places like Pittsburgh and Detroit and Cleveland, these manufacturing areas in the United States will go into decline, it won't matter because our pockets will get bigger. This is what the American capitalists are thinking. The owners of these big businesses, the auto industries, these apparel industries, places like Nike, these other companies, tech companies, people that were making VCRs, all these things that would end up in American households in the 70s and the 80s. They are coming from overseas and they're being produced and constructed by this labor that's controlled by these puppet leaders like the Duvaliers. So it's no coincidence the time period that this is happening. So Haiti is not benefiting from this. The small elite class is benefiting from it, just like the elite in the US. But the masses, of course, are being hyper exploited. One of the other elements, economic quote unquote aid, during the 70s and the 80s, during the baby doc years, Haiti becomes entrenched in IMF, World Bank, and WTO affairs. IMF is International Monetary Fund. The World Bank is what that sounds like. It's a bank where countries can get loans for projects, and the World Trade Organization, and these other, what they call Bretton Woods institutions. These institutions were set up primarily by the United States following World War II in order to have a new economic order following that war. So what the IMF did with Haiti, like they did with so many countries in Africa, in South America, in the Caribbean, they put them in these structural adjustment programs where the country would get loans and there were stringent policies that the country had to abide by that were attached to these loans. And in Haiti, agriculture was heavily impacted by these structural adjustment programs. How so? One of the key aspects of structural adjustment is privatization. They don't want the state to own a lot of things. So a lot of the land that was not controlled by the peasantry that was controlled by the states. A lot of even the land that was controlled by the peasantry, a lot of that land was repossessed by the state, sold off to private individuals, primarily from outside foreigners. And that land that used to be used for food production, so that the people could feed themselves, was now used for export crop production. And this is a pattern that we see all over the world. Countries in the so-called third world, in Africa, in Asia, in South America, instead of producing crops that will feed the populations, are producing things like flowers and coffee and cotton and other things that are extractive that aren't going for the masses of people, that are going externally. What does this cause? Obviously, it's very obvious what this causes. This causes starvation. This causes food insecurity. Many of the crops that are grown for export also end up with soil erosion. You can't grow these crops year after year, season after season after season without, cycling crops and letting the land, lay fallow for a while. So all of this is leading to the economic problems that we see in Haiti today and the social problems that we see in Haiti today. They took somewhere, I think one estimate, 30% of the land that was used for food production, more than 30%, that was used for food production, now used for export crops. This was a condition of the aid. And of course, the elite, they're fine with this. They don't care because they know the aid package that's supposed to be coming from the IMF and coming from the World Bank and coming from all these development agencies, those millions of dollars, billions of dollars, that's never going to go back to the people anyway. It's going right in the pockets of the elite. So they don't care about the repercussions of any of this. One of the more striking examples in Haiti that many people might not realize was so important, the culling of the Creole pig. You might be thinking, okay, Clyde, what are you talking about? What's so important about pigs? Here's how jacked up this story is. 1978. Now, I got to get in a little bit of biology, and I'm not a bio teacher, so just bear with me. Actually, zoology, actually. This is what you see in this picture are Haitian Creole pigs. They're a different type of pig than the U.S. pig, a farm pig, the big pink fat pig that you see. They're suited for the environment. They're actually remnants of old world pigs that were brought over with the Spanish back in the day, during Columbus's time and after that, and let loose on the island. An invasive species, but they prospered in Haiti. Number one, they're very robust. So they're strong animals. They're small, so they're able to get into places. They don't need a whole lot of food to survive. They are resistant to a lot of diseases. They reproduce well. So if you have a male and a female, you can have a nice litter every couple of months. And what this did for the rural populations in Haiti, it allowed them to have something that could be used for not only food, for protein, but also you can take this pig and you could sell these pigs and you can buy school, you can pay for school fees. You can pay for healthcare fees. Very important. And even in the spiritual realm, these were very important for certain practices in voodoo. So these pigs were incredibly important to the rural population in Haiti. 1978 comes along. In the Dominican Republic, it was found that some of their pigs on the other side of the island had swine flu. Particularly, they always put these things on Africa. African swine flu. The U.S. pig farmers freaked out. They said, this is way too close to the United States, and we don't want our pigs infected with swine flu. So through the USAID development organization, the U.S. forced Haiti to kill all of its pigs. They said, even though we only found that 2% of the pigs in Haiti have swine flu, and the rest seem incredibly resistant to this disease, we don't want to take any chances of this spreading to the United States, so we're going to need you to kill every single pig in Haiti, particularly this type of pig, the Creole pig. You need to kill them all. And in return, what USAID is going to do, we're going to reimburse all those farmers that have these pigs, and we're going to send you new pigs from the United States to make up for the pigs you have. And don't worry, these pigs are bigger. You'll be able to eat more of them. They're just better pigs overall. So kill all your pigs. We're going to reimburse you, and we're going to send you some new pigs. Government went out against the wishes of all this peasantry that they understand completely that this doesn't make any sense. Only 2% of the pigs have it. The rest of them are very resistant. Just kill the 2% that have it. And we have the way diseases work, we have a stock of pigs that will be resistant to this disease, and it'll be fine. We don't want these new pigs. Of course, the government didn't listen. Rounded up all the pigs, killed as many of the pigs as they can. And there was like a handful that survived, and they're kind of making a comeback now. But this is what they did. And by the time we get to 83, supposedly all the Creole pigs had been killed. Not only were the farmers not reimbursed, because of course, the money comes in, guess where the money's going? To the Duvalier and everything. So of course the farmers weren't being reimbursed. But then they do bring in some of the American pigs for these farmers. So these farmers get these big, fat, pink American pigs. Now here's the problem. The Creole pig ate everything. Garbage, scraps of plant life. They ate everything. They ate, mangoes out there. This becomes really important too. Mangoes. Farmers would grow mangoes. Mangoes would fall. Humans didn't eat all. They ate the mangoes, the rinds. They ate everything. They were indiscriminate in what they ate. They were able to survive off the land in Haiti. Very little care. So for a peasant that doesn't have anything because the government doesn't invest in agriculture, for a peasant that has very little, you have this animal that's money in the bank. It's like a bank for the peasant class that requires next to nothing to care for. But now you got this fat American pig that many Haitians took to calling the pink princess or the white princesses. Because these fat pigs they wouldn't eat what was on the ground. They would only eat these very expensive U.S. Corn wheat mixtures that cost like $100 U.S. to feed these pigs. So instead of getting something that was what you had that cost nothing to take care of, little to nothing to take care of, now you got this big fat American pig that refuses to eat, that is very temperamental, is hard to breed, and it's costing you money to take care of. You're spending more money for the pig to eat than you're spending for you to eat. Think about that. Completely ruin the economy. Let's see all of the cascading effects of this. So the farmers no longer have these pigs. So just on a more basic level, you kill the pig, you eat the pig, your protein levels go down. So starvation increases among the rural population. You don't have these pigs and the piglets anymore that you can sell and trade. So now you can't send your kids to school because you can't pay the school fees that were relying upon your ability to breed and get rid of these pigs. Healthcare fees, all those things associated with the money that you had in these pigs is now gone. Not only that, because the pigs aren't there to eat the mangoes and the things, you have to start cutting down the mango trees for charcoal and other things. When you cut down these trees, that leads to deforestation and soil erosion. And one of the other things that were brought into Haiti also to kind of make up for this, more goats were imported. Now, goats are cool because just like pigs, they kind of take care of themselves, but goats eat young saps of trees. So you get deforestation, you got soil erosion, which leads to greater landslides, because we're talking about a very mountainous area. So when the trees are gone and the roots aren't holding things together, you got landslides that further destroy people's lives. So the rural population in the late 70s, early 80s is suffering because of this. So if you're suffering in the rural areas, what is your first thing you're thinking of doing? I'm gonna try to get to the city. So you start migrating to Port-au-Prince, Cape Haitian, Yacht Mill, all these places, you start migrating. But there's no jobs there either. So now you have this influx of people from the rural areas overpopulating the cities. And we know what happens when cities get overpopulated and resources get tight. This is when the political situation becomes untenable because they don't see any alternative. Then if you have the means, if you leave the countryside, get to the city, there's no jobs in the city, your next step, where are you gonna go? Well, I'm gonna try to get out. I'm gonna go to Miami. I'm gonna get to New York. I'm gonna get to Montreal if I can. But what happens? After all of this misery caused by U.S. policies combined with the greed of the Haitian elite, the U.S. sees the Haitians and they say, you can't come here. Cuban exiles, you can come. If you make it to Florida, you can come because we're fighting against your leadership. But Haitians, we like your leadership, so you got to go back to Haiti. This is the mentality. This is what you would see later on when we talk about the 2020s when we see Haitians at the U.S. border leaving Haiti because of policies created by the U.S., looking for economic security, looking to feed their families, and beaten back at the Texas border. This is where this is beginning. So we see this. So just this alone, this policy alone, cost hundreds of thousands of lives in Haiti, and life chances and life choices in Haiti. During this time, this is also when the manufacturing assembling industries begin to grow up in Haiti. Again, American and other foreign capital, primarily American capitalists, bring their production to Haiti. All the tools, all the things are constructed in the U.S. The Haitians are just exploited for their labor for putting these things together. Underwear, shirts, military apparel, all of these things, baseballs, all of this stuff was being produced in Haiti. The labor was being heavily exploited, long hours, low pay, everything that goes in it. If you tried to organize, if you tried to form a union, the government made sure that you were executed, disappeared, exiled, those types of things. But yet, the masses continued to resist. And through all of these policies, by the time we get to 1986, Baby Doc's position is untenable. The elites are again fighting amongst themselves because of his new technocrats versus the old school noirist elites led by his mother. They're fighting, but now the masses. And it starts in the rural areas where all this misery is happening because of the pigs and the agricultural policies. It's the rural areas that start the resistance. But the resistance is also led by people that had left Haiti and the children of the people that had left Haiti in the 60s and in the early 70s. The Haitian exile community in places like New York, in Miami, in Montreal, in other parts of Florida. People like Magali Marcelin, who was right up here in Canada. She was born in Haiti and had been exiled during the Duvalier regime. She was an artist. She had used theater to motivate the people, to talk about women's rights, to talk about the rights of the working class people. She had to go underground to organize, and eventually she was exiled, and she continued to advocate from Montreal and places in Canada and used her position as an exile to organize people to resist the Duvaliers. This was a story that was familiar to many exile communities. She comes back to Haiti in 1985, and she founds the Women's House, which was a place where women could get together, women that were escaping abusive relationships, women that needed economic support. They could come, they could get support, they could organize, they could talk about political matters. And it's movements like this that brought people together to talk about these things in the face of a renewed terror, government terror. Because as Baby Doc's position became untenable, he became even more like his father in terms of unleashing terror on the population. So women's organizations like this and activists like Marcelin were very courageous in their attempts to undermine this regime. This is, again, another example of that revolutionary spirit that has never left the Haitian people since they were first embarked in Haiti in the 15th century. Africans will resist wherever they are, no matter the stakes. No matter the amount of terror that they face, they will resist. The church became crucial.
How'd she die?
She died of, I gotta double check that. I think she may have been, I think she passed an earthquake. I think she passed an earthquake. I'm gonna double check that, but I'm pretty sure she passed an earthquake. The church became a leading institution in particularly fighting against Baby Doc. By this time, those liberation theologians, those that survived the tortures and the exiles, they continued their work, and they started this movement, L'Église, the little church movement. These were Catholics, these were other groups that believed in liberation theology, and they would have these masses and these services throughout the country where people, again, if you can control, as the Duvaliers, they controlled the press and the educational institutions. One place that they couldn't completely control was the church. So people got together and they talked about how they could use their spirituality and their faith to overcome the economic and political challenges of the time. So this movement in the 1980s to overthrow Duvalier, it was primarily a non-violent social movement. You had the folks in the cities, the women's organizations, the remnants of the union movement, but it was primarily the folks in the rural areas through these church organizations, through other political organizations that used non-violent tactics of just organizing, getting together, defying the Tonton Macoute, defying the leopards, defying the police forces, demonstrating, having marches in the major cities with youth. The youth would be shot down, and then I would create a larger demonstration because of what happened to the youth. So all of this coalesced, and finally in 1986, the U.S. says, all right, things have gotten to the point in Haiti where, okay, Duvalier no longer serves a purpose. We'll set it up so that he can go into exile in the United States. And before he leaves, he makes sure to take, I forgot about the radio as well. The radio becomes incredibly important to this resistance as well. When Duvalier leaves in 1986, but not before going into the Haitian treasury and taking as much as he could and going into exile, billions of dollars. So by the time he leaves in 1986, for the next 4 years, there's intense political struggle. You have the remnants of the Tonton Macoute. You have the remnants You have military officers that want power. You have those elites, both the dark-skinned and the light-skinned elites, that want to reestablish themselves as power. And around and surrounding all of them are the masses that want change. And they're going to use the institutions that were created during this resistance to bring about, or to attempt to bring about, the type of change that they wanted in 1804, the type of change that they wanted in 1946, the type of change they wanted in 1957. By the time we get to 1990, they attempt to make that change. And when we come back from our first break, we'll talk about what that change looked like and what happened. So let's open it up for any questions for this first part, and then we'll get into the second half of our session. Daniel, anything in the chat? I don't see anything. And if you have a question, please raise your hand.
There are no questions in the chat right now.
Okay, any hands? Anybody have a question or a comment? Okay, Robin, go ahead. And there's the mic.
Was there any evidence that Papa Doc was a sadistic psycho before he took power, or any evidence that happened after he took power?
Yeah, it came pretty much by surprise for a lot of people. There was no indication that he would do that before. Again, he was this mild-mannered doctor. I've heard reports that he got really bad after he had this stroke, it's really amazing to see what people will do to stay in power and use whatever means possible to do that. But yeah, it was brutal. It was a brutal systemic use of terror in a population, and we should definitely talk more about that and more about the role of Canada and the U.S. and other folks that upheld this. And when we start talking about reparatory justice, I mean, baby Doc died in, I want to say, 2000. Was it 16, 14, 16? Relatively recently, and I don't remember, and someone can correct me if I'm wrong, and I'll bring this up next week. I don't remember a whole lot of inquiries into bringing that money back that he stole, or what was left to his family, because I think he had children. Where is the money? Where's the billions of dollars that were taken from the Haitian treasury? We got a hand up, so go ahead. I don't have my glasses. Let me put my glasses on. Who is? Oh, go. Yes.
So my grandmother lived in Haiti, and she had a big store on one of the prime streets in Haiti. And I could never understand it. So the Tonton Macoute would come once or twice a week. They didn't have actual uniforms on, but they had these huge machetes. And they would go around, and my grandmother would slip whatever money she had or whatever into their hands, and they would go away, and I'd say, well, why do you have to do that? And she'd say, it's for protection.
Yeah.
So now I have a better understanding of it, but it's so sad. They would go from door to door to door, and people were literally terrified of the Tonton.
This is how it operated. They not only supplemented what they were receiving from the Duvalier regime, but they were essentially gangsters and would do these things to further impoverish the population. So you become a predator. And again, I always like to have that example of the hypothetical person that joins the Tonton Macoute, because a lot of times we think that these people aren't born monsters. You're made a monster. You know, the folks that were in that Tonton Macoute, a lot of them weren't born sadistic, and they were people that themselves were struggling with hunger, with these things. And the question is, do I stay prey or do I become a predator? And a lot of people decide, not a lot, but some people decide, I would rather be a predator than prey. And they join these institutions and they inflict these things. And just like the victims of these crimes need a tremendous amount of counseling and these things, the perpetrators need a tremendous amount of counseling and rehabilitation, because this is only 2020. There are still people that are alive that were Tonton Macoutes that are still struggling for power. I mean, they're old now, but they did these things at the time. And a whole generation of people have come up under this terror and have seen things. I mean, this is a situation where a lot of folks need a tremendous amount of spiritual and psychological rehabilitation, because as African people around the world, we have seen things and been through things that you can't just let happen and not deal with on an emotional and psychological level. Many of us are dealing with the type of traumas that were inflicted as a result of the actions and inactions of so-called leaders, political leaders, religious leaders, so on and so forth. So, yeah, it's a really unfortunate time period. And a lot of people have these stories. A lot of folks have these stories. And again, I know there's people on this call that are Haitian, of Haitian descent, and and this is why we have to teach all aspects of the history, not just the good, so we don't repeat these negative things. Daniel, something pop up in the chat?
Yes, somebody said, I grew up hearing about Papa Doc and Baby Doc and how terrible they were as leaders.
Yeah, they made the news a lot, and they gave a lot of things a bad name, particularly Papa Doc. I mean, this is voodoo outside of people that understand African religions and others. It usually has a negative connotation, and Papa Doc didn't make it any better, because although on the one hand, yeah, you upholded something that is true, that yes, this is a valid spiritual tradition, but you used it for evil. Just like the folks that use Catholicism, that use Islam, or that use any other religions that can be used for evil. He did that and put that negative stain on voodoo. So you have these figures that really did a number on Haiti in the second half of the 20th century, Papa Doc and Baby Doc, that have put Haiti in the situation that it is now. So this is the time period where Haiti goes from being, in the early 20th century, particularly I can speak from the African American experience, Haiti was the symbol, along with Ethiopia, of resistance. People dressing up like Toussaint L'Ouverture, dressing up like Dessalines. Every Black History Month, there had to be something about Haiti. Just like you can't have Black History Month without mentioning Dr. King, or in the Canadian context, Viola Desmond or Harriet Tubman. You can't have Black history without talking about those figures. Haiti was one of those figures. You couldn't have Black history without talking about the Haitian Revolution. Until the second part of the 20th century, because of the actions of these elite, led by Papa Doc and Baby Doc, and because of the actions of their collaborators in the U.S., now Haiti has become this perceived charity case that folks don't want to have nothing to do with. This is why we have this class, to show that there's a reason for this. None of these things just happen out of historical happenstance. There's a reason for all of this. And it's important that we, as people that love Haiti, whether we're of Haitian descent or not, but we love African Revolution, we love African people, we want to see Haiti rehabilitated, this is the type of history that we have to teach. We have to tell people that this is not a lost cause. And when you look at these patterns in Haitian history, you can see very clearly what's happening today in 2024. It becomes incredibly clear. All this talk of Kenyan troops coming into Haiti, all this talk of chaos, using the word gangs to describe every single activity of resistance in Haiti. Not to say that there aren't street gangs that are engaged in criminal activity, of course, just like the street gangs everywhere else in the world. But to establish every act of political resistance as gang-related in Haiti, it makes it so it's easy for folks outside to say, obviously these people can't run their own economy or politics. Let's go ahead and intervene and make it okay. So we got to talk about what led up to this and what's happening and how we can address it. Any other questions before we go on? All right, so after 1986, going into the 1990s, an election is called for in the 1990s. In 1990, of course, the old elites and the military officers are all going to run for this new presidential election. And one person is actually reluctant to run. One of the more popular people in the country. He's one of the leading figures in the little church movement, named John Bertrand Aristide, who was a priest who had made a name for himself as an ardent opponent of the Duvaliers, who had used his station in his church to help the poor, to create educational institutions. And he is really reluctantly pushed to run for president by his supporters that say, listen, we have this movement, this Lavalas movement, this movement of the People's Flood movement that represents all the aspirations of the urban working class, the rural peasantry. I shouldn't call them peasantry anymore, it's a doubted term, but the rural population. We want you to be our face, to be our voice in this new Haitian regime. We're going to have these quote unquote free and fair elections for the first time in recent history. So he runs. And in December 1990, he's elected president by something like 70% of the population. Elects this Catholic priest. And at the time, he's kind of at odds with his church as well. The church has now taken a more conservative stance. The International Catholic Church, under even though the Pope had come to Haiti in '83 and talked about the need for change, now the Catholic Church is becoming a little bit more conservative. The winds of change. So he's actually being castigated by his church for doing all this political activity, but he actually wins the presidency. I want Daniel, if you wouldn't mind, to pull up the video. And we're going to watch about 15 minutes of this because I love this documentary. And it deals with the Aristide years and what happened. So we're just going to watch the first 15 minutes, and then we're going to talk about it. I'm going to put a link to this video on our course website as well. So Daniel, go ahead. We're not going to start at the very beginning. We'll start at about the 5-minute mark.
Je connais Aristide depuis 1982 et au moment où il a été ordonné prêtre. Et j'ai suivi son évolution, son engagement dans la théologie de la libération et aux côtés des jeunes.
While Father Guy Poulard came to oppose Aristide's presidency, and now serves a small, wealthy parish in Jacmel, he recalls his former colleague's commitment to social change.
Après plus de 20 ans de dictature et du valériste, la population haïtienne aspirait à autre chose. Moi, je sentais en lui un homme qui était animé pas seulement de bonne volonté, mais qui était pris, on dirait, par les problèmes de son peuple.
Dr. Paul Farmer, an American physician and anthropologist who has worked in Haiti's impoverished Central Plateau for 25 years, agrees with Father Poulard.
The majority of his inspiration comes from listening to very, very poor parishioners, people living in slums, people who are child servants, women who have many children but don't have any stable employment. And that was the focus of his own ministry as a priest.
Farmer's clinic has grown into an impressive medical and educational complex and serves as a model for bringing health care to the world's poorest communities. Farmer himself has been outspoken in his support for Haiti's embattled former president.
When you look back at people who adopt ideas that are unnerving to the powerful, the idea, for example, that the Haitian poor just want poverty with dignity and a few basic rights, clean water to go to school, etc. Those are profoundly disturbing ideas in some circles, and they're profoundly popular ideas among the poor themselves.
Already well known as a tireless advocate for the poor, in the late 1980s, Aristide began drawing attention for his fervent criticism of the military and foreign domination of the country.
Si vraiment ils reconnaissent avoir volé, si vraiment ils reconnaissent avoir volé à travers leurs compatriotes tout au long du processus de colonisation, si vraiment ils veulent dire à la face du monde entier qu'ils sont développés, qu'ils commencent à ne pas avoir pitié d'Haïti. Nous n'avons pas besoin de pitié, nous. Qu'ils commencent à ne pas avoir pitié de nous, mais à reconnaître le droit que nous avons, droit de récupérer un peu de ce qu'ils ont volé. Alors, ils pourront se dire des personnes humaines qui transcendent le matériel pour déboucher sur une dimension spirituelle où la personne humaine se développe continuellement et n'ose pas appeler quelqu'un qui l'a exploité un sous-développé quand lui-même il est le premier sous-développé.
Aristide's passionate speeches chastising the world's wealthier powers not only had an impact in Haiti, but within the international community as well. John Shattuck, who served throughout the globe as the Assistant Secretary of State for Human Rights in the Clinton administration, recalls Aristide's significance following the Duvalier dictatorships.
Aristide represented a people's reform movement and genuinely, I think, was trying for the first time ever in Haitian history, at least in modern history, to be the voice of the voiceless, the voice of the people who had previously had no source of support and who were constantly the victims of a corrupt elite and a military regime.
Aristide and others like him are the opposite, are the result of the Duvalier years. The Duvaliers were there for 30 years almost and created a society that's completely immoral.
For over 30 years, Francois Duvalier and later his son Jean-Claude ruled Haiti as dictators, dominating the population with brutality. Using a ruthless militia of loyalists known as the Tonton Macoute, the Duvaliers expropriated millions of dollars from the Haitian treasury. And committed countless human rights abuses. The uprising finally forced Jean-Claude from power in 1986. He fled to France, leaving in his wake a nation ravaged by chaos and violence. Ray LaForest, now a human rights activist, remembers growing up under the Duvalier regime.
So Duvalier represented our complete lack of respect for life, abuse, raping of women and children and families, a degradation of the society, just naked aggression, a neo-fascist system.
Jean-Claude Duvalier's departure left both a political and security vacuum in Haiti. And for the next 3 years, former Tonton Macoutes and army loyalists battled over control of the country, killing countless civilians. In 1990, the international community finally decided it had seen enough unrest, and a UN mission was dispatched to Haiti to oversee a presidential election. Father Aristide, refusing to be intimidated by multiple assassination attempts and the burning of his church and orphanage, decided to run for the presidency. Aristide called his party La Balasse, or the People's Flood, and his grassroots campaign and fiery populist rhetoric instantly connected with the people tired of oppression and suffering.
President Aristide came out of Cité Soleil. He was a priest who spoke Creole and talked with the people and communicated. Prior to that time, people in power spoke French. And up comes this priest talking to poor people, and yes, he created for them hope. He communicated with them, and he led the way to change.
Today, President Aristide lives in exile in South Africa. When we spoke with him there, he described the challenge of trying to work with a society dangerously divided into wealthy elites and millions of poor.
We said we should not create a kind of war where rich fighting poor and poor fighting against rich, but a kind of place where rich and poor can work together.
He's simply saying to the property classes, you have to give a little more to the poor. We want to move from abject misery to dignified poverty. That was his program.
But those in Haiti's elite class who opposed Aristide's social reforms accuse him of being divisive.
En prônant la lutte, sorte de lutte des classes, là, il a tout cassé, je crois. Il fallait évidemment prôner le partage, parce que il faut le reconnaître qu'en Haïti, notre élite n'a pas travaillé suffisamment à la promotion des masses.
But Danny Glover, a political activist, actor, and close friend of Aristide who's been following events in Haiti for over 30 years, disagrees.
To raise the minimum wage just slightly, which was what Aristide attempted to do, to bring medical services to that island, which has not only inadequate medical services, but is one of the leading countries in the region in terms of HIV/AIDS. To bring those things to that island were very minimal things you should do for people who you consider to be human beings.
Not all of Aristide's opposition came from within Haiti. 600 miles to the north, the U.S. government had its own ideas for the upcoming election. Noam Chomsky, a professor at MIT who has written extensively about Haiti, remembers the American reaction to Aristide's candidacy.
Finally, in 1990, Haiti had its first democratic election. The U.S. was appalled by the outcome. The victor was a populist priest, Aristide, whose support had come from a lively civil society that had developed in the slums and the hills that nobody was paying any attention to, just poor people. And the idea that they would elect their own president was outrageous. The U.S. at once moved to try to undermine the democratic government, withdrew aid, transferred aid to opposition elements.
Before Aristide had even entered the race, the U.S. government had put millions of dollars behind the campaign of a former World Bank official, Marc Bazin. Despite this support, on December 16, 1990, Jean-Bertrand Aristide became the first democratically elected president of Haiti, with a staggering 67% of the vote. It was a boldly voiced mandate. But while the Haitian people rejoiced, Aristide's opponents, both in Haiti and within the U.S. government, began to explore more palatable options.
When the United States picked Marc Bazin to be the candidate, he comes that little scraggly guy who was talking about union rights, who was talking about, reivindication of the Haitian people. And because he was able to bring them together so well, within 3 months of being a candidate, Aristide won the election with a huge plurality. The US was extremely terrified of the potential for Aristide.
Aristide's talk of union rights and higher minimum wages in Haiti put at stake for the U.S. business community 20,000 assembly line jobs, contracted at less than 50 cents a day by corporations like Disney and Walmart. Sweatshop labor formerly protected by the island's heavily armed elites and political instability.
The forces that were at work were long-standing supporters of the old regime in Haiti, particularly the old military regime, but also some of the Haitian elites. There were support for those elites in the old regime in the U.S. Congress.
Once we have election where we will not have weapons, bloodshed, but on an equal basis. Human beings freely choosing people they want to lead them, then we would feed our democratic process. Then we would break with the tradition of moving from one coup d'etat to another coup d'etat, but moving from one democratic election to another one. That was the goal.
Aristide represented a threat to them because Aristide was the voice of the 85% of the country who had never been heard. If that can happen in Haiti, then it could happen in Colombia, and it's obviously happened in Venezuela, it can happen in Peru, and so on down the line. And they do not want those kind of popular democracies because they believe that they will confront U.S. economic interests.
In 1990, Haiti had the first free, fair, democratic elections when I became president. 7 months later, a coup happened. At that time, Bush's father was the president of the United States.
The 1991 coup was carried out by the Haitian army, whose leadership was trained by the CIA and at the Fort Benning Infantry School in the United States. Although Aristide was restored to office by President Clinton in 1994, he had only a year left in his term. When René Préval won the elections that followed, Aristide became the first Haitian president ever to peacefully hand over power to another elected leader. After regaining the presidency in the 2000 elections, Aristide was forced out of office for the second time in early 2004. Today, he sees a clear connection between the two coups.
In 2004, a kidnapping happened. They kidnapped me, which is also a coup, and Bush's son is the president. Somehow, something can be linked to find the reason that happened twice. So I think they wanted to continue what they started in 1991 through the first coup.
Hold on a second. Hold on for a second, please. President Aristide resigned. He has left his country. The Constitution of Haiti is working. There is an interim president, as per the Constitution, in place. I have ordered the deployment of Marines as the leading element of an interim international force to help bring order and stability to Haiti. I have done so in working with the international community. This government believes it is essential that Haiti have a hopeful future. This is the beginning of a new chapter in the country's history. I would urge the people of Haiti to reject violence, to give this break from the past a chance to work, and the United States is prepared to help. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Daniel. You can stop this. I forgot how stupid George Bush was. That Donald Trump has really lowered the bar, because back then Bush was probably one of the worst presidents in U.S. history, and Trump came along and made Bush look like Kennedy. But yeah, so we see this. Elected in 1990, 7 months later, coup d'etat, re-elected in 2000, 4 years later, kidnapped, put on a plane, dropped off in Central African Republic, a country that Haiti had no diplomatic ties to, U.S. had no diplomatic ties to. So whenever the Haitian people attempt to exercise popular sovereignty, we see the elites, in collaboration with the U.S., destroy that, or attempt to destroy that. But the Haitian people continue their resolve and their resistance. It's a shame that when all this is going on, 2010, we had the most horrific natural disaster that's exacerbated by institutional disasters to hit Haiti, the earthquake in 2010, which killed hundreds of thousands of people, and again, let's go back to the 80s and 90s where, yeah, the earthquake was bad. It's a natural thing to happen. This is like, I've said this in this class for other things too, like droughts that happen in Africa. Droughts, earthquakes, these are natural occurrences that happen and they're unfortunate. But the after effects and the amount of destruction that occurs is often the result of political problems and economic problems of neglect and theft by the elite. The cities that were affected, many of those cities were overcrowded. Buildings weren't built to code because of all of the corruption that was in the government, going back to the Duvalier years. So you had buildings that weren't built to code. You had people that were building unsafe dwellings because they needed places to stay because the government was not providing homes. The government wasn't providing healthcare, education, all these basic things that a government should provide because they were too busy stealing money from the people. So the people took it upon themselves to build their own structures, to build their own homes. So when earthquakes happen and these shelters and these homes that are unstable to begin with, they collapse. And then you don't have the infrastructure, the telecommunications infrastructure that the government should have been maintaining to alert people about what was going on. The death and the destruction becomes even greater than what would have normally occurred in a horrible thing like a tropical storm or an earthquake or a drought or any of these things. This is something that we see, again, throughout the world where you have a natural disaster meet government ineptitude. So, but the Haitian people, and I keep going back to this, their resiliency. With all of this, you would think if people would just give up, or people would just say, fine, we'll just take whatever the international community and our elites have to offer. They continue to resist. They continue to organize. They came out of 2010 with a greater resolve to rebuild the country. Haitian folks in the diaspora gave and organized money. Some of that money was even stolen by grifters. But even with that, people continued to donate, to develop, all in the face of this UN now, the U.S. using the UN to bring in troops. Again, always in the name of stability, in the name of development and all these things. So we're going to stop there today. We're going to pick up in 2011 and going up to the present next week. And we're all living through this period. So I encourage anyone that's on this call, next week I want it to be a little bit more collaborative. If those of you that have ideas that have been following the news in Haiti, let's talk more than just opposed to the lecture format. We'll do a little bit of that, but I really want to talk more next week about where we're at, and more importantly, how we can continue to support the ongoing Haitian revolution and the masses in Haiti. So we'll stop there today. Oh, no. Sorry, I got one more bonus thing I got to show you, because this is coming from Ottawa. We're broadcasting this class from Ottawa, and I keep talking about the U.S. and us. Let's not forget Canada's role in a lot of this. Daniel, if you wouldn't mind playing that short other video, and then we'll end class with this.
Today, there's not a single person who is sitting in office who was elected. Not a single one. There are 10 people who are in the remnant of what used to be the Senate, but they're not sitting. You don't have any functioning institution elected by the people that is still in place in Haiti right now. Haiti is an international crime scene. And that crime was committed by local criminals allied with international criminals. And they get away with it because their populations are not aware of how foreign policy of the United States, France, and Canada get implemented in places like Haiti.
Bien sûr, c'est pas de mettre Haïti en tutelle, c'était davantage de dire est-ce que la souveraineté des États est un principe immuable?
Do we believe that in 2021 we can have a differential type of behavior towards nations that are led by indigenous and black people than we do when we're dealing with white-led societies? And this is the challenge Haiti poses. Haiti has posed that challenge from its birth to white supremacy. The so-called Haitian elected officials have no credibility in front of the people. And of course, they don't feel that they are accountable to the people either, because they know they were appointed by the foreign occupation forces. Journalist after this asking me what I think about foreign intervention. And I don't know how many times they ask me the question again and again to see if there's some kind of nuance that I can add to the answer no. One of our posters says Canada out of Haiti. I mean, you're familiar with that poster, you've seen it, we've used it for years. And the article comes out, big, title, Canadian and Haitians are asking Canada to intervene. It doesn't matter what you say, because they already have their script, so they're going to say it even when you have a sign behind you saying Canada out of Haiti, and then the title is they're asking Canada to intervene.
Thanks. And as you see, but now the new slick move is, instead of just having RCMP boots on the ground, instead of having U.S. Marines on the ground, let's go to Africa, get African troops under U.S., Canadian, UN direction, and then bring them into Haiti. Maybe that'll make a difference. This is the new okie doke they're trying to pull. So, again, so relevant to those of us that love Haiti and love Haitian people, and so relevant to this discussion. That coup was planned right up the street. I'm at 235 Montreal Road. If you go straight, Montreal Road becomes Rideau Street. Rideau Street goes right up to the Château Laurier. Big hotel, you'll see it right across from Rideau Center, where they sat, had drinks, US, France, Canada, and planned the 2004 coup, right up the street. So we'll stop there today, and we'll open up next week with this information. We'll open up first to questions and discussions and announcements, and then next week we'll pick up with this, where we at today, and how did we get here in the past 12, 13 years.
I think even 10% of the general U.S. populace are aware of the ways in which the U.S. has interfered with democracies all over the global south.
No, I don't think so at all. Wait a minute.